I got really paranoid. I experienced a lot of hypervigilance. I had a lot of panic attacks.
The journey to healing is never an easy one.
It was terrifying and so hard to live with.
But author and advocate Madeline Popelka is aiming to make it just a little bit easier.
Going through trauma and living with PTSD can affect you and affect those around you.
Through awareness and advocacy,
a lot of times you can't do anything but cry.
Community and conversation.
I want to remind people that where they are is perfectly okay.
And most importantly, vulnerability.
You know, I've been through trauma. I have attempted suicide. I have gone through all these things and I still struggle, and that's okay. And I just want to show people that healing is possible.
On an all-new Intentional Living with Courtney Meyers. Welcome to Intentional Living with Courtney Meyers, a podcast dedicated to those seeking a more fulfilled and purposeful life through thought-provoking conversation, spiritual exploration, and authentic connections. The intentional movement has begun, and if you found yourself here, you are a part of it. Intentional Living with Courtney Meyers starts now. Hi, Madeline. Welcome to Intentional Living with Courtney Meyers. I am so honored and excited to talk to you today. I know we're probably going to talk about a couple of heavy topics, but I think there's some beauty and some healing that we're going to share too. So welcome to the show. I am so happy to have you here today.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm looking forward to this conversation.
I am too, because a lot of what we talk about on this show is going within and trying to understand who we are on an authentic level. But when we go within, we have to deal with a lot of stuff. And for anyone listening, we're probably going to talk about some heavy things today. So just be prepared. But you know, when we do go within, it brings up a lot. And I know a lot of your work is focused on trauma healing, PTSD, going through some big things in our life. And as hard as that is, and as big as they are, and the things that you've experienced were on a big scale, all of us really have stuff that we bury deep. And when we start to look at who we are on the inside, it brings up emotions and feelings, and they may be small things. And I've actually even heard you talk about this, like you dismissed the enormity of your own experiences sometimes.
Yes.
And so big or small, we all have them, and we may dismiss them or minimize them, but it doesn't change the fact that we are dealing with a lot of stuff.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Like every single one of us goes through something in our lives. And because we are different individuals with different backgrounds, and these experiences compound in different ways and show up in different ways for everyone, it's a very individual journey navigating through it all and figuring out how to heal. And that's why you got to go within. You can get inspiration from outside, from other people. Like I know a lot of people in my community look to me, but I constantly need to remind people that my experience is just one, and it's individual to me, and everyone else has their own experiences and will figure out the best way for themselves to heal, because I can't do that work for them because they're different from me. So it's a very individual journey that requires us to go in and to confront the scary things.
Well, and that is really where a lot of it is. And that's why I think ignore it a lot, is because it is scary and hard to deal with things. But you had the courage to write about and share your story, which I talk about that a lot, is we have to have the courage to get vulnerable so that we can connect with others, that we can share our story, so that we can heal ourselves and help others heal themselves. Because when we share, we connect with someone else, and they know that they can be in a safe space to share their truth too. So let's start with what did you have to overcome, and what did you face and have to go through to start to begin to heal? Because I know you suffered from PTSD from quite a few experiences throughout your life. So let's kind of get into it.
Yes. Yeah. So, as you said, I went through several experiences throughout my life, starting in my childhood when And I struggled with my mental health back then through my teenage years, but I did not have the knowledge or the vocabulary
Mhm.
to sum up what I was going through, and I couldn't make
Yeah.
sense of it. And when you're that young, you just go to it's me. Like I just
Yeah.
thought that there was something wrong with me. And that's why I kept everything inside because I was like, everyone else is, quote unquote normal. What's
Yeah.
wrong with me? And I had a lot of shame and kept that inside. So, um, there was that first layer. And then I experienced a sexual assault when I was in college, but I kept on telling myself I wasn't raped. It wasn't that bad. So,
Hmm.
just tried to push it aside and move on. And then when I was in my late 20s, I went through two other traumatic experiences. One was getting chased down the street when I was literally running for my life and screaming for help. Got out of that experience untouched physically. So again, dismissed it,
Yeah.
minimized it, saying it wasn't that bad. I got out of it okay. And then the last one that really put my PTSD symptoms over the edge was being out with one of my friends and witnessing her getting drugged and the aftermath of her getting assaulted by the person who drugged her. And that really shook me and disrupted my sense of safety. Just all these events that compounded. So again, they weren't quote unquote that bad, but they all added up and I never dealt with each individual experience on its own. My way of
Hmm.
coping was to just try to forget about it and move on. And in the end, all of these trauma symptoms started to build up. So I
Hmm.
experienced depression and anxiety when I was young, but as I experienced these other things in my 20s, I got really paranoid. I experienced a lot of hypervigilance. I had a lot of panic attacks, like multiple panic
Yeah.
attacks a day. And it was terrifying and so hard to live with. And because my symptoms at first were okay, so this is I was so disconnected with everything that was going on. I so far detached myself from these experiences that as all these trauma symptoms were coming up, I was like, what is happening to me? And I thought that there was something physically wrong with me. So I went to a physician. I didn't go to a mental health professional. I went to a physician because I was like, it feels like I'm going to have a heart attack. Like my heart is racing. What is wrong
Mm.
with me? But that I didn't know at the time that that's what panic and anxiety can feel like. And
Yeah.
they ran all the tests. Yeah, they ran all the tests and everything. They were like, you're completely healthy physically. So I was like, okay, I guess I need to go find a psychologist. And that was really my first step toward healing was, and it was so confusing figuring, like experiencing all the symptoms, which are extremely overwhelming.
Hmm.
They make it so hard for you to function. I could not work. I could not sleep. So get, so getting myself to a mental health professional was a huge step toward healing for me.
But isn't that true? And I've talked about this a lot. Like we store so much in our body, and if we ignore it long enough, like our body is not going to lie to us. Like it is going to come out. We can push things down. We can ignore it. We can do all these things, but like push is going to come to shove and it is going to come out in some way. I mean, I
Yes.
am right there with you. I have gone through physical, holistic health. I've done every study and like had everything, all my tests come back and they're like, no, you're perfectly fine. I'm like, no, it's not normal to have the stomach issues I have constantly. I've gone through I've gone through years of therapy. I am on medication for anxiety and depression and ruminating thoughts. But like you, in my teenage years, I was like, this is normal to constantly think of the same thing over and over and over and over again. You think that that's a normal thing, quote unquote normal, if that's what you know and that's what you grow up with. So you dismiss these things about yourself and it takes something big, like having that debilitating panic attack, which I've had those too. it's debilitating. And then even afterwards, it's like, I felt like I had like a week-long hangover afterwards. I'm like, what the hell just happened to me? And
Yeah.
and it's like your body's not going to lie to you. You can only ignore things long enough till you're pushed to actually seek that help you need.
Oh, that's so true. And when you pointed out stomach issues, I experienced
Yeah.
those too. I had stomach ulcers, and once again, they did the test and they're like, "We don't know what's causing these. Have you been under a lot of stress?" And I was like, yes. That's it. That's it.
Yeah. Well, and even like people, if you look at the outside world or you're having conversations with your friends or things like that, you will chalk it up to stress. Oh, this is just something stressful. But when you've compartmentalized so many other things, it just has this like physical, energetic buildup that you have to release. And so it will show up in all these ways. But we are so easy to just jump to like, oh no, we're just stressed out or we got a lot going on, and as opposed to taking the real steps to like finally peel away those layers and figure out what's going on with us, which it sounds like you finally did.
Yes, I did. And it took some time. When I
Mm-hmm.
started therapy, it wasn't like I went in and my therapist did ask, "Have you gone through any terrifying experiences?" Nothing had come to mind. Because again, I detached myself from these experiences. I really tried to just forget about them and move on. And I was like, my grandfather passed away a couple of years ago. I was really trying, I could not think about these experiences. And then
Yeah.
it was like, I want to say 6 weeks into therapy when we started doing dream work and that sort of thing, because I would be waking up in a panic, but I could never remember my dreams. So I was
Mm.
having nightmares, but I didn't know what they were about, because that takes self-awareness too. And that is a
Yeah.
practice to be able to remember your dreams. So once I started doing work around that, then I had dreams about getting chased, getting attacked by men, and then I'd bring that information to my therapist, and then more memories would start to surface.
Mm.
And then it all started to make more sense.
Completely. I mean, it's crazy how our subconscious mind works and it just like keeps us all like in a little computer in the background and we don't even know how it's affecting us on a daily basis. But I mean, even you had to go
Right.
so deep as to talk about things that happened to you in your childhood that affects other people. And that I think is hard when we really start to do that internal work is it brings other people into the picture. And it's not necessarily that we're always trying to blame someone, but like it's really important to note like how our outside influences affect who we are, how we think about ourselves, how we move forward in life, and really like set the tone for everything. So like the things that you talk about in your book, you experienced as a child. And so you had to dive deep and
Mm-hmm.
actually talk about that. And that's hard too, because then it affects others.
Yeah. So for listeners, you're talking about what I went through with my mom,
Mm-hmm.
who knew that corporal punishment, she's a refugee from Vietnam, and in Vietnam, corporal punishment was the norm. That's how she grew up. But she knew that that wasn't acceptable in the United States. So she wouldn't get physical with me, but she
Mm-hmm.
would essentially just scare the shit out of me into behaving better, behaving the way that she wanted me to. And it really did affect me. And that experience was really the last one that I could unpack. And those memories didn't start surfacing
Mm-hmm.
until a few years of trauma work, because it was really terrifying and hard to address. Like, this is someone that I care for and I
Yeah.
know cares for me. And it was really hard to go there, because I still value the relationship, and I want to be loved by her.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously I wrote the book, so I had
Yeah.
to talk to my mom about it, and I had to tell her, and I was really terrified to do that. I was worried that she would deny what happened, or dismiss me in another way. But I brought it up. it was really hard. I was crying the whole time. And she was like, I'm sorry. I didn't know better. I didn't know how that could affect you. I was doing my best. And, I have a lot of compassion for my mom because she comes from a very traumatic past. And I know how going through trauma and living with PTSD can affect you and affect those around you, even if it isn't intentional. When we are suffering, we are way less patient, we're irritable, we can have outbursts. It's like going through it on my end. I have a lot of compassion for my mom
Mm-hmm.
and what she experienced, but that still doesn't erase what I went through with her. But so yeah, it was really hard to address. So I completely understand why people don't even allow themselves to go there.
Mm-hmm.
But I will say that it has been so incredibly healing for me. And I it built a lot of like understanding around myself and my negative self-talk and my self-criticism and self-hatred. So now I am still working on changing my internal narrative. It's a really long process, but addressing it was the first step.
Well, our internal narrative, I mean, it is so important to how we show up in the world. Like you said, that negative self-talk and all those things. Like, how do you work on changing that? Because, the older we get, the more that narrative sticks, but it's formed at such a young age. So, going through something with someone like your mom who you love, and you want their approval. And then if it's like, you're getting these experiences, so then you're building this like narrative of how love is in the world. So like, how do you rewrite that?
Yeah, so the first step is definitely building awareness around
Mm-hmm.
this narrative and your negative self-talk.
Mm-hmm.
Because if that's just what you're used to and
Yeah.
you're not really recognizing, you're just going to continue on with thinking that way. So the first step is to bring awareness to it. And then once you have awareness of it, just like stop yourself in your tracks
Mm-hmm.
and what I have done is, and what I still continue practicing is when I notice myself saying something negative about myself, like, so say I make a mistake and I'm like, oh my God, you're so
Mm-hmm.
stupid. Like, how
Yeah.
could you think like that? I really try to stop myself and try to treat myself with more self-compassion,
Mm.
telling myself things like, everyone makes mistakes. It's okay. It's a natural part of being human. Just trying to be softer with myself to try to
Mm-hmm.
balance out those thoughts and really have an internal narrative that is more accurate to what is going on, because our inner critics, their job is to just criticize us
Yeah.
and to talk to us badly. And it really isn't a direct reflection of what is happening in the world, and it isn't a reflection of ourselves. So, I know like a lot of people, they feel like they're lying to themselves when they're being
Mm-hmm.
nice to themselves, but that's because their inner critic is so loud. So it
Yeah.
really is a practice learning how to be more compassionate and caring toward yourself. And I've definitely found that the more you talk to yourself in a kinder way, um, the more the more like self-doubt. I mean, the less self-doubt that you had, like the inner critic becomes quieter. They aren't as loud.
Mm-hmm. I mean, that is so true. We are so focused on criticizing ourselves and really like we are so mean to ourselves. Like the way we talk to ourselves, we would never talk to a friend or a loved one that way. Or even if you're going through this
Exactly.
journey, I mean, healing, like you said, it's a long journey and it's, it's a consistent piece of work. But like if you like are talking to a partner or a friend or someone in your life that's close to you about it, and they like point out to you, I feel like sometimes we almost like double down on that meanness to ourselves. Like if they're like, you're being really negative or you're talking really poorly to yourself, it's like you don't want that outside criticism. This has to be an inside job. You have, it's almost like any sort of recovery. We have to choose to walk this path alone, because it's not going to change if we don't do it ourselves.
Oh, that's so true. Because if someone gives us a compliment, if we
Yeah.
have a negative internal voice, we're going to be like, you're lying to me, like,
Yeah.
whatever. That I've noticed that happens to me a lot. So it's so true. We need to really start, it really needs to come from us and start to, so you can start building a more neutral narrative at the least. It doesn't have to be positive. I mean, I'm, I don't know if that would ever be possible for me to just have a positive internal narrative. So I just work on having something more neutral, more
Mm-hmm.
rooted in reality. Because if I have a really strong self critic, that can easily spiral into just
Mm.
essentially beating myself up, and
Yeah.
that can lead to depression. So neutrality has been the goal for me. I know, like, for a lot of people, like, self-love and fully loving yourself is the goal. But it's like, I'm right now where I am, I'm still working on self-acceptance. And and I think a lot of people can relate to that. I know my community for sure, especially when they've had abusive pasts and have had
Yeah.
really strong external critics that have informed these internal voices. It can be a really big challenge.
Well, I mean, I think that's really important to note because, we talk about being positive or having a positive outlook on ourselves and stuff. But if you are coming up from a place of like such strong criticism or such negativity, going from 0 to 100 is like, okay, this is not going to happen. Like, let's get real. Let's get honest. And I think,
Exactly.
like, let's just raise that baseline to like,
Exactly.
I'm okay. Okay, I'm doing better today. Like, let's get to that neutral spot. And honestly, I think we all perform better in that neutral spot because you can go high, you can go low, and we need to experience that as human beings. That is part of our experience, is to have the highs and lows. So if our baseline is neutral, then we're good.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. Yes.
I mean, I talked to DJ Eidson of Limitless Minds, and that's what they teach. That's what they teach, high achieving athletes. And like, they're, it's founded by like Russell Wilson and people like that. It's like anything in life. We can look at our life like an athlete, like a sport, like a game. You have to have that baseline, and we don't want to create those extremes. So I think, and then I think it is also important to remember is that when we do come from within, like that inner person is actually what you were talking about: self-loving, compassionate. That's who we really are.
Mm-hmm.
But if our critic is so loud, it's really hard to, connect with that person inside.
For sure. Absolutely.
So how do you help your community start to like bring themselves into that neutral space?
So, I mean, I try to remind people on my page a lot that they are enough as they are, even when they're struggling, even when they have really hard days, even when they make mistakes. I try to be a source of hope and positivity for my community, to be like, I've been through trauma. I have attempted suicide. I have gone through all these things, and I'm okay right now. I still
Mm.
struggle, and that's okay. And I just want to show people that healing is possible. So when they see, a lot of us grew up without having those positive influences, those positive voices that tell us that we are enough as we are. You don't need to have to keep striving to do better, to be better, to become a more improved version of yourself. I want to remind people that where they are is perfectly okay, and that healing as possible. So I think that that is one of the most powerful ways that I help people. Also, by
Mhm.
just sharing my story and my insights so they can learn from my experiences. I know that they relate to a lot of what I say, and that leads them to think about their lives and their experiences in different ways, which can be healing as well.
I mean, I absolutely love the fact that you said, like, we don't need to keep striving to be a better version of ourselves. It is one of the things that I talk about against, in the wellness community, in the mindset community, in the healing community, in the spiritual community, which I'm very, very much involved in. The whole concept of being your best self or like being a better you. Like, I don't believe in that because like you said is we are doing our best with what we can in any given moment. So I love that you're like helping people understand that like you don't need to strive for more. And I find that this constant narrative of like striving to be better or to achieve more or to perform in a different way only sets us up for more mental issues, more anxiety, more depression, and leads to things like you just talked
Yeah.
about, which is a huge trigger point in this show. And we've talked about it. I can't tell you. And I keep having I feel like I'm on repeat. I keep having this conversation with women, high achieving women, women who have performed well in life, who have thought about suicide, or like you said, attempted it. Like that to me is an
Hmm.
issue that is not being talked about enough. And I'm really hearing it from women lately. I mean, maybe because
Yeah.
this podcast is really like has a high focus on women's voices, but like that's not okay. Like what brought you to that point and like how did you get out of it? Because like this is a conversation that I keep having.
Yeah. I mean, when I attempted suicide, I was in college and it was a lot of things that led to it. So it was definitely the undiagnosed anxiety, depression from my trauma as a child. But at that point, I had really low self esteem already.
Mm.
I thought that I was stupid. I was unhappy with my body. I thought that I was fat because I heard people telling me, like, oh, you'd be beautiful if you lost 10 pounds, like throughout my entire life. And I could never lose weight. And, and then when I was in college, I had the guy who I was dating. I found out that he had cheated on me.
Mm-hmm.
And then I had a lot of shame around that because I thought that it was my fault. Like I wasn't good enough or there was something wrong with me that made him do that. So I didn't tell my friends about it because I was so embarrassed because I really saw it as a personal failure. And then I wasn't doing well in school. And I mean, I was doing fine in school. But when I say doing well, it's because my parents expected me to get straight A's. And
Mm-hmm.
I could never live up to that expectation. I was getting mostly B's. And, that is perfectly fine. That is still great. But I
Yes.
had this expectation of getting straight A's. And I was like, and I was about to get a C in a class. And I was like, how am I going to, I can't live I
Oh
just
my God.
thought that it would be better if I were dead than to be a C student and someone who, and just all the pain that I felt with just like, and talking about this now, it's like there is no need to have so much pressure on kids, like college kids, but high school kids to perform like that. Um, there is no need. And like it's just like not the reality is like we all strive to be the best, a top performer, but the reality is most of us are just going to be average, and that is perfectly okay. Um, it's and I didn't know that. It's like I look back at that now and I'm just like, a C is fine. Like whatever, you're
Yeah.
passing. It's okay. Like, but it really felt like the end of the world for me. And with all those other things going on, I just felt hopeless, and I was like, I don't know what I'm going to do. And it's like back then I didn't get mental health support. And I think that what really brought, and I think it was a routine that kind of brought me out of it. Like I got the C, but it did end up being okay.
Yeah.
I was still in school. It's not like my parents were going to pull me out of college. So it ended up being okay. And I think it was just getting back into a routine and like trying to focus on some good friendships and the pain associated with that experience didn't go away until I started addressing it, which was only a few years ago, because I was really ashamed of having attempted suicide because I
Mm.
heard this narrative growing up around how it's a sin if you try to kill yourself, and then just about people talking about how selfish it is
Yeah.
because you're leaving loved ones behind. But the thing is, like, when you're in that state, I think a lot of us feel like we are a burden to others and that
Yeah.
everyone else's lives will be better if we're gone. And that's
Mm.
truly how I felt. But I mean, I was with a partner for many years and he would talk about how, we'd see a tragic like suicide story on the news and he would be like, "Oh, that's so selfish." And then he did not know about that part of my
Mm.
past. And it just kept on contributing to the shame. And it was really hard for me to bring up. So I even kept it a secret from my first therapist. Um, I didn't tell her about it. I think the first time I brought it up in therapy was a couple years later with another therapist because I was so
Wow.
ashamed. Yeah.
But that shame thing and really everything you're talking about is like what you look like to the outside and the external influences. And I think so much of our mental health, like we
Mm-hmm.
come back to that. We build up this image of how we're presenting ourselves to the world as opposed to being authentic and being who we truly are. And we worry so much about what these, oh, I'm going to get a C or I'm going to this or that. Like I'm right there with you. I think I got my first C, or I actually think I got a D once in college, but it was because, and I was a straight A student before that, but it was because like I went back and looked, they had me somehow enrolled in like two different like study group sessions and I never showed up to one. So of course I got like an F in that one. So it got fixed, but
Yeah.
still like I came out of like high school getting, straight A's and everything. And then, you get to college and things happen. And I got, I think a C or a D or a C once, the world still goes on, but we worry so much about what this looks like to the outside world. And when we can take our step back, it's like, did that really matter? No, but in the moment, it can become so all consuming. So we have to find ways to cope with that.
Mm-hmm.
And by sharing our stories with one another, it can be like, okay, maybe I can get a little bit different perspective of what we're actually going through. And I think that's the most important thing with what you're doing with your book and your community is you're giving people that hope of that connection, because a lot of what we deal with is a lack of connection or seeing ourselves in other people because we're putting up this facade of how we want ourselves to look.
Right. That's so true. So true.
So, I mean, and it's funny that you even said that about your therapist because, that's a place where you're supposed to be able to open up and be honest, but you still obviously were caring what they thought.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think that was, I mean, my first several sessions in therapy were just like, I felt like I was on a job interview or something. I was
Yes.
trying to impress my therapist. It was really weird because it was new to me. I didn't know how I was supposed to act around. I didn't know what I was supposed to share. Therapy was a whole learning process. But yeah, there's so much that I kept from my first therapist that I just didn't. Because also, if you bring it up in therapy, they're going to ask questions, and I didn't want to
Mm-hmm.
go there too. I just wasn't ready to address it. And there were a lot of other things going on too. And I just kept on being like, no, like I can't, no, no, no. And then because I had never talked about it before, taking that first step and even admitting it to myself, because again, this is another experience that I completely detached myself from because I was so
Mm-hmm.
ashamed. And then what brought it up for me was where it was no longer avoidable was, I think I watched, what movie was it? The one with Lady Gaga, A Star is
Oh,
Born.
yeah. Mm-hmm.
And at the end, there's a suicide. And I think that I could not stop crying. Like I was really triggered and I could not stop crying for like a day. And that's when I was like, okay, now I need to address this. I need to bring it up because this is really, I can't go on like this. Just, I was a wreck.
So do you think we're lying to ourselves? Do you think just as much as we, that we're trying to look a certain way to the outside world, do you think we try and create a narrative for ourselves that we are a certain way rather than being honest with ourselves?
Absolutely. I think that that's a way that a lot of us survive and continue living in the world because some of these things that we are hiding from ourselves, that we are not being completely honest with ourselves about, are really, really painful. And
Mm.
sometimes avoidance is the only way to carry on with our lives because we all have responsibilities, we have work, we need to care for others. And if you go there sometimes a lot of times you can't do anything but cry
Mm.
and and it's just it's really hard, it's really hard, but then that's also the only way to move past it too, is to address these things because as we were talking about it at the
Yeah.
beginning of this conversation, um, these things will get your attention in one way or another. And for me, with my suicide attempt, that was the movie that really set it
Hmm.
off for me. But yeah, it could be anything because triggers are all around us, and we won't really understand what is triggering something within us if we don't have awareness of those triggers. So sometimes it will just happen and we're like, what is this and what does it mean?
Yeah. So are you still triggered today, or do you find yourself at a point where healing has happened over certain things that what once would have triggered you doesn't trigger you anymore?
So I definitely still get triggered, but there are some triggers that I have that don't affect me anymore, that I have desensitized. So because I got chased, and one noise that really was engraved in my brain was the shoes that I heard
Mm.
behind me. So for a really long time, I could not handle people walking behind me. Like I would get severe anxiety. I would start to
Wow.
panic. If I heard that very specific noise of like these heels clapping on concrete because this person was wearing like dress shoes or boots or
Hmm.
something with that, like with
Yeah.
more of a heel like that. So if I heard that specific noise, I'd go into a panic. And there was a point when I was like, I don't want to walk outside because I don't want to hear people walking behind me. And I was like, that's no way to live. So I told this to my therapist and we worked through it. But some of these triggers are just like inevitable. Like what is happening in the news right now when we're seeing so
Yeah.
much devastation and so much violence, that I think will always be hard for me to watch. And around times like these, like I am limiting my news consumption. I am not spending as much time on social media just because when I'm constantly exposed to those images, it impacts the way that I see things. Like I find myself being more hyper vigilant. I have intrusive thoughts that essentially replay what I'm seeing in the news. And I am at a point in my healing journey where I can recognize when it's happening instead of just spiraling and going into a really dark place. I have awareness of what's happening and I can work toward grounding myself. But so yeah, I still get triggered. It is inevitable sometimes just because of this world that we live in, and we can't control other people's actions and what happens around us all the time. So it is really important to focus on how we can care for ourselves in these moments when we do get triggered, and focus on how we can ground ourselves so we can feel like we will be okay.
Well, I think that's important to note is like the outside voices and noises, and it might not even be from your own personal group of people that you speak with. It can be like hearing on the news or, crime television or crime podcasts, which actually, I love that too. Those things are so, so popular now, but then I don't think as a whole, as a society, we actually realize how much it is affecting us, even on a subconscious level, and keeping us on edge or keeping us in that state of constant vigilance or, bringing in these scare tactics. I went to journalism school. The first thing they teach you is if it bleeds, it leads. It's definitely a thing that's out there. And so we are so, even if we're trying to limit what we're taking, that energy is out there in the world. So I think it is definitely a big contributor to people being on edge or having anxiety. I mean, anxiety is such a huge issue right now. Depression is a big issue. Our mental health is really, and I don't know if it's just because we talk about it more than we used to or what, but it is a big thing. And I think we need to start looking at the environmental reasons for why so many of us are faced with issues like this, maybe not to the extreme of suicide, but like dealing with anxiety or depression or these thoughts.
Yeah, absolutely. It's not just I think a lot of people, when they deal with anxiety, depression, other mental health issues, we do see it as there's something wrong with me, like it's an individual personal failure, when that is not true. There are so many other factors involved. And, the way that our society is set up, sometimes it's just really hard to exist as you are. It's just, I mean, that would be, if we address trauma and mental health issues from the root cause, I mean, that would take a whole restructure of our world. So, I mean, the best we can do for now is just focusing on, caring for ourselves, caring for our communities, and trying to get through these things together.
Yeah. I mean, dealing with things at the root cause is something that I think we need to talk about in all medicine in general, but definitely when it comes to our mental health issues and things like that, we really do need to get to the bottom of it. But like you said, that's a big ask and it's a big overhaul. So all we can really do is focus on ourselves and our own journey and how we can show up as true to ourselves as possible and give ourselves that compassion and grace to work through whatever it is we are working through. Because everyone, whether you have these big traumas like you have had in your life, or it's just a little thing, we all have them. We all have them, and it all affects everything in our life. And it could be, I've heard it called like micro traumas, like little things that seem really insignificant throughout your life can build up to give you PTSD as an adult, even without that big trauma recollection. So, I mean, it is something that is big in society, and we just need to give ourselves the grace and compassion to talk through them, see each other, and do what we can to heal. Doesn't mean it goes away, but we have to give ourselves the awareness to deal with it.
For sure. Yes.
Well, how do we join your community? Where can we get your book, and where can we get all of your stories and connection? Because I know that is part of the healing process.
Yeah, so my community on Instagram is called Healing from PTSD. So you can feel free to follow there, connect with me there. I do a lot of polls and that sort of thing. So you really feel less alone in your struggles there,
Mm-hmm.
because you can see that a whole community can relate to what you're going through. And people are also just really kind and supportive in the comments too. And it really warms my heart to see that. I also have a newsletter on Substack where you can get the link to sign up on my website, which is just madelinepopelka.com. And my book, You're Going to Be Okay, is available wherever books are sold: Barnes & Noble, Amazon, Bookshop, your local independent bookstore. And yeah, that's it.
Well, Madeline, thank you so much for joining me today. And thank you for sharing your story and being so open and honest about some really hard topics.
Thanks so much. I really appreciate you and the conversation.
And that's it for today's Intentional Living with Courtney Meyers. Thank you so much for listening. And thank you, Madeline Popelka, for joining me in such a real, open, and honest conversation about some really big and important topics. If you want to join Madeline's community, I'll put all the information of how to get in touch with her in the show notes, and be sure to pick up her book. And as always, you can find Intentional Living with Courtney Meyers and Intentional Media on our website at CourtneyMyers.com. That's where you'll find our courses, our books, and everything else we have going on. I can't wait to talk to you next week. Bye.